Welcome to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. MotorWeek is made possible by TireRack.com, WeatherTech, and by Rain-X, Hum by Verizon, and State Farm. Here's your MotorWeek podcast host, John Davis.
Thank you, Alec Webb, and welcome to MotorWeek Podcast number 191. I am John Davis, and joining me today in Audio Studio A for a change is writer-producer Brian Robinson.
Hello, John.
Online content coordinator Greg Carlos.
Hey.
Our video producer, editor, Joe Ligo.
Glad to be here.
And Joe is also the producer of the podcast. We've got a new vehicle review or viewer question about minivans. Remember those? And but first, we're going to go to the 2018 Paris Motor Show. If you've been looking at our website, you saw the coverage. We have more coming on the show itself. And I was the lucky guy that drew the long straw and got to go this year. Before we get into the vehicles there that were important, you probably know from either listening or watching MotorWeek or reading the other automotive press that traditional auto shows seem to be on the decline, with a lot of auto manufacturers avoiding them because of cost. And that indeed was the way it was at Paris, even though it's a show that happens every 2 years and is considered one of the crown jewels of the auto show circuit, especially in Europe. A lot of brands weren't there. Ford, Nissan, Volkswagen was almost absent. There, of course, was no Alfa Romeo, no Jeep, no Fiat. And so much so that one of their main halls, number 5, where there's usually standing room only, was taken up by a big historical display. So it was a very quiet show in some ways, yet remarkably, there were still a lot of new vehicles that had their first public appearance there, and we even had one new automaker that no one had ever heard of before. So with that said, we're going to kind of go around the table, and I'll start off just by starting the conversation. BMW seems to have the most confidence, along with Mercedes, in these big shows still, and they showed to the public the new BMW 3 Series, among others. And that was the first public coming out, although we had already seen pictures and seen the specs. So from the list that you've all got before you of the different vehicles that were there, do you want to talk about any? You want to talk about the 3 Series? What's your impression of what you saw at the show? Take it away.
Yeah, I wasn't following it too closely, but the Audi e-tron, is that finally a production one? Or
yeah,
it seems we've been having an e-tron for 6 years now.
That close they have, but that is the production one.
That's how I felt. I feel like we've been hearing about it for a long time.
And this is the first time it's been really an SUV that I know of. I thought it was always something else.
It was at Pebble. Did that make its first debut at Pebble, I think?
Pebble was the first debut. Yeah. This was its European debut.
But anyway, we've been hearing about e-tron for so many auto shows.
Right. Is it a concept car? Is it a sedan? Is it actual? Finally, it's an
SUV
thing.
A mid-size SUV, a Tesla X fighting SUV.
Right. But that's what I'm saying. Like, in the meantime, while they've been talking about it, we have Jaguars, I-Pace, and then we have, Mercedes came out with theirs too. So it's just like.
And Mercedes is probably going to beat the e-tron to production.
Yeah.
So, which we did a segment on MotorWeek recently about about all the electric SUVs coming to market, and I got to say, between the Mercedes EQC and the Audi e-tron, I like the Audi a little bit better. Just whenever
visually,
I mean, I haven't driven none of us have driven them yet, but I think visually, I just think, and even looking at the specs, it just looks like it would be my choice if I was shopping in that market, which I don't know how many people are. But I liked it a lot more. 22, this is the U.S. alone, 22 all-EV vehicles are due on the market here within the next couple of years. Who's going to buy these things?
That's a very good question.
Millennials. That's hopefully.
I don't know. Where are they going to get them charged up?
Have $70,000 to drop on one of these?
You know, I was in Europe for 2 weeks, and I saw lots of electric vehicles, a surprising number on the roads. But, of course, you got to keep it in context. It was still probably only less than 1%. But I saw EV chargers everywhere, and only one time did I see one vehicle hooked up to one.
So all the chargers are there, but
they're
nobody's
sitting
using
there,
them.
but nobody's using them, and you can't park there. So they're taking up parking spaces, but there's no vehicles. I don't know.
Well, not to take up too much time on this, but back to your point, I think they're not, the way car makers are going now is they're all starting to push, especially luxury ones, they're starting to push that subscription service, which is how millennials buy it. They don't buy anything now where it's
They
all
don't wanna
subscription.
own
So
anything.
I hear what you're saying that they're 70 grand, but I don't think that's how people are going to be buying cars in the next couple of years.
Even Tesla is talking about doing a lot more leasing than what they were doing before. So I think you're absolutely right. I really didn't think much of the subscription thing at the beginning, but as you start looking at all these very expensive vehicles, why would you want to own one?
You wouldn't.
Yeah, because the technology will change so quickly.
Even now, people just lease them.
Yeah, I met a guy who leases a BMW i3 this weekend, but that's another story. Another car that stuck out to me, we were talking before the podcast started, was the CRV Hybrid, but they wouldn't say whether or not it's coming to the U.S.
It certainly looks like it's ready. I mean, they have almost no compromise in cargo room with it. They've done a great job. Almost everything that Honda and Toyota showed there, including Lexus, was some form of a hybrid. But I looked at the CRV, and we've already gotten the visual facelift. I just don't see any reason why it wouldn't come here. And, they're talking 54, I think, miles per gallon with it.
I'm sure it will. They like to give
I think so too.
As little information as possible at these auto shows. They're ones that they're always there, but they tell you like next to nothing.
The looking down the list, there were a lot of other first, and I keep saying public debut because most of the vehicles we had seen pictures of or had been somewhere else at a small event. But the new BMW Z4 was very interesting looking. More of the same, but still I thought a nice job. They made an awfully big deal about the return of the 8 Series. It's how long since it's been since they had?
Been a minute.
Yeah, long time.
The Mercedes, of course, showed up with their GLE and, as you mentioned, Joe, the EQC. They also had a entry level. This is, I think, kind of a joke. Mercedes AMG GT with 4-door with a 6-cylinder engine. And I'm thinking, if you can afford that price of car, do you really want that? The Porsche Macan had a mild do-over. The 911 Speedster, they're going to build that. They're actually going to go into production. It's pretty cool. I guess a lot of attention went over to Ferrari with their 2 specialized 1- and 2-seat vehicles, the Monza SP1 and the SP2, very retro, almost 30-style racing vehicles. They're going to build 499 total, and buyers will have a choice between either. And so
they are really sweet looking.
They are pretty sweet.
The press photos are pretty cool.
The Lexus RC made a public debut. You mentioned the hybrid, the Kia e-Niro. That looks interesting.
Promising for sure.
Very promising.
I think that's what we have, a long-term Niro, and we're going to be getting the plug-in hybrid version. I think that car just screams, I need an EV platform, because I think it would be perfect.
And is it similar to the Konas? Because isn't Garrick
I believe
driving
so,
the
yeah.
Hyundai Kona EV as
I
we
always
speak?
get those small platforms confused, but I know the e-Niro has already been shown in Korea, and I guess basically is getting close to production. And then, if there's nothing else you want to talk about there, we have VinFast, the first Vietnamese auto company. It's owned by a big conglomerate there, but the particular auto section is made up of a lot of Americans and Europeans that have managerial roles. Pininfarina did the styling, but the real cool part is that they're built on last generation BMW 5 Series sedan and X5 chassis with engines that are the last generation but lack some of the latest electronic controls. It was pretty interesting stuff.
So is this,
big crowds.
Did BMW just sell them the tooling and the rights and
I'm
stuff?
assuming so. I honestly don't know the details, and I'm not sure they've said, but you couldn't do that any other way. They must have either bought the tooling or have some kind of contractual arrangement. I suspect it's both. And what a intelligent move by BMW to basically get more money out of your designs. And they didn't give away a lot of the most sophisticated engine controls and stuff. But, the vehicles looked, they were big, mid-size, and they were nicely styled. And you couldn't really tell about quality. They looked good, but of course it was an auto show.
It's an SUV
and a sedan. Correct.
Okay, because I was going to say.
With the prefix Lux 2.0, and then sedan notification and a SUV.
Will they be coming to the U.S. before a Chinese company? That's the question.
You know, that's a real good question. And you look at these and say, well, gee, they probably could pass emissions here and everything else pretty easily. The concepts they had there looked very well done. So I wonder if they could. You know, after all, we have an awful lot of other imports from Vietnam coming in and clothing and so forth. So it's not like it would be something new.
So keep an eye out
VinFast.
for VinFast.
A new name propped up. Any other comments about anything at Paris that you want to mention?
I think we just glazed over the 3 Series. What
bigger,
obviously all
wider,
new.
more powerful. No manual transmission that we know of. There might be one for the diesel over there, but we probably won't see it. 8-speed automatic. I think that's
par for the course.
Yeah, it's par for the course. Kind of a bummer, but there you are. Nice looking car. Looks very evolutionary. I'm sure it's a little bigger. I mean, it's so big now that
they're huge.
You know that the 5 Series has got to get bigger too.
Yeah, it's. I'm waiting for the next one to slot in underneath.
There was an Audi R8 LMS GT3. I didn't spend a lot of time looking at it, but it's always nice to see that's still alive. There was a yellow edition, and it is yellow, of the Lexus SC. There is this Infiniti Project Black S, which was based on an X60. That was Infinity's only presence there. They had nothing else. They had like a little corral where automakers that didn't want to rent their own space could all group themselves together. And there were some unusual cars there that I'd never seen before. But by and large, it was kind of like, if you want to come to the show but you don't want to spend any money, you go there. So.
It'll be interesting to see how the auto show evolves as a thing.
Well, what do you think about the Detroit plan to kind of move it to June and make it more part of a festival? I mean, that's like Goodwood. That's what they're trying to model that after.
I think that it's good for the people organizing the show, but it depends on if the automakers are willing to spend the money to build outdoor displays and all the test tracks and all that. I mean, they got to get the automakers to show up.
Yeah, I agree.
The organizers do.
Okay, let's move on to a couple of specific vehicles. Let's start with the 2019 Acura RDX, third generation of Acura's small RDX. Brian, you want to start?
Yeah, it's interesting to me how when the original RDX came out, it was early in the small crossover before it was really a craze, and they showed up with a turbo 4-cylinder, which
really
no one else
sophisticated
had,
one. And
it was super fun to drive. And it was great, and people loved it. And then the next gen, they made it ginormous and
bland,
put a V6 in there and made it super soft. And now they went back to the original, which now everyone else does, turbo 4s and athletic, even more sporty than it was originally. I would think you can even get an A-Spec model, right?
Yeah.
And that turbo 2-liter is pretty strong.
Stout.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, now it seems like they're late to the party when in reality
they
they
actually
started the party.
They got there too early. Yeah, the reason, what they would tell us, and whether it's true or not, they said, well, you guys loved the first generation, but the public didn't. They bought an Acura and opened the hood and wanted to see a 6-cylinder engine. I don't know if that's true, but that was their excuse. But they went
How many Acura owners open their hood?
I can't believe very many. They went so far the other direction. It's like they backed off completely. So I'm happy to see this. I think it drives nice. It looks nice. It's what the RDX ought to be. It should be. This should have been the second generation RDX.
I agree. They found a good balance. We had the A-Spec, so it was a little sportier than probably your average RDX. Super comfortable seats. The heads-up display is probably the crispest one I've seen in any car. I'm talking luxury, any car. Yeah, I just came away really impressed. I didn't like again, we were in A-Spec and top trim, so it had the one of those command pads, like you essentially draw on it, which we don't like, and I don't like either.
It's a general rule, but
I'll say
it wasn't as bad.
Right. When I learned how to use it, it wasn't so bad. Definitely better than a Lexus version. So.
And do you think with weird features like that, if you were the owner of the car, that you would get used to it and like it? Because we're constantly hopping in and out of stuff, and I sometimes think that just when we start to get the hang of something, you switch cars. But if you were the owner, would it be a different story?
But think back to when central controllers first started. We hated iDrive. We weren't very much better about the first Mercedes. But then Audi came along and they just did it better. And all of a sudden, we kind of all liked it. So I think execution does have a lot to do with it. And I agree with Greg. I don't like the system that Audi uses for the pad, but I thought the Acura system worked a little bit better. But, I don't know what the public will, because I still felt like it took your attention.
I think it's also because it's a bit of a dense screen. There is a lot of different selections. Yeah, so that's part of it. It does take some attention away from driving.
Now, is your impression, since this is their own chassis for the moment, that this is the same chassis that the Honda Passport's going to use?
No, I think the Passport's just a slightly shorter Pilot.
It is.
Yeah.
So it's going to stay on the Pilot.
It's just a two-row Pilot.
Right now, they're claiming this is the chassis unique to them.
I'm sure there'll be more accuracy on it. I'm not sure anything will get it on the Honda side as of right now.
Anything else to add? Nice comeback on the RDX. We're all happy about that. Okay, let's move on to the 2019 Subaru Ascent. Subaru's second attempt at a three-row crossover, 7 or 8 passengers.
First real attempt.
The Tribeca went away 5 years ago, and it was the first iteration of that was pretty. I don't want to use the word ugly, but it was ugly. And then they tried to make it look bland, and it still didn't sell, and they had a 6-cylinder engine. This one's got a new 2.4-liter Turbo 4, seems pretty stout in horsepower. I drove it last night for the first time. It's a Subaru. I mean, it's so familiar because our family has an Outback, and getting from one to the other, you felt right at home. It did nothing. It didn't light any fires, but I think it's going to be a huge hit.
I have had, and Greg agreed with me, we were talking about this earlier today, I have had more people ask me about the Subaru Ascent than almost any other vehicle this year. I have friends, I have people, have you driven the Ascent?
Are they Subaru owners?
Some of them are. Most of them tend to be. I guess my circle maybe has more Subaru owners than the average person, but just the interest in this vehicle.
Well, their families are getting older. They're growing up. They need something bigger.
Yeah,
than a Forester.
I talked to a Subaru salesperson when I was getting my car serviced. He said they had a demo in for a week, and they sold 8 in a week. And it's just all these people who are moving up from Foresters that were originally going to Honda Pilots or Toyota Highlanders. Now they're going to Ascents.
And it's big. It's not quite as big as the Volkswagen Atlas, but
it's got big. More space than like the Explorer and most everything in that segment. So,
but have you guys noticed the same level of like enthusiasm or like people asking you about it?
I've had a couple.
Yeah, for sure. When I was on the Forester event, I was talking with one of their internals, and they asked us, the journalists, a question of like, why do we think their brand is kind of not a resurgence, but they've really been taking off the last few years in terms of sales, and they just wanted to know why we think. I personally felt that, so not only are their advertising campaigns, I think, targeted at the right people, and they're actually well executed campaigns, I just think Subaru's really hit like a tipping point, honestly, of good products and testimonials to where finally there's so many people who realize and recognize Subaru as reliable, safe,
very safe.
And I think
like Volvo used to be safe.
Yeah, it's the whole thing, the whole tipping point thing. Like it finally reached it, and now everybody's like, wow, like Subaru is what I want if I'm a family person, if I have pets,
I think they've made a personal connection to their buyers better than anybody else out there. You watch their ads, and they make you think that they really, what's the word I'm trying to say? There's just something about the way they talk to their prospective buyers.
They know you.
Like they know you, we understand you, you're part of our family.
Almost the exact opposite approach of Chevrolet. Like they
smarter than
don't
you.
talk down to the customer. They listen to the customer. They know they have a story. And that's the whole thing with their ads. They're not selling the car. They're selling a story. They're selling a lifestyle with the car. And I think they've done a tremendous job.
And their vehicles do not always have all of the latest bells and whistles. We have an Outback. It's 6 years old now, and we bought it because it fit exactly what we wanted. But it didn't have all the features that, from my testing vehicles with you folks, that I thought it should have. But it was reliable. It's nice looking. It was great for long trips. It just hit all the other. And of course, my spouse wanted something that was safe. It did well in the crash test, and she felt a connection to the brand and never had owned one before, but felt like they had more of her interest at heart.
Yeah, a friend of mine was looking at it, and I guess his parents bought one, and the eyesight was a huge selling point.
Well,
That's the
it's
first time
very
I've
good
ever
system.
heard somebody say safety was a
Yeah,
main sell.
yeah.
You know, the whole like, oh, safety doesn't sell, but apparently
Does these days.
Well, they make a big deal about the eyesight being standard, which it is, but then it's like the only safety system that's standard.
right.
Like all
You got
the
to
other,
pay more for almost everything else.
yeah, all the others are add-ons. So
But what about the Ascent itself? I guess we got kinda
Okay, the
off
only
topic.
thing, we had the top trim level, was it Touring?
Touring
I think
is,
so,
And
yeah,
it had
that's their
the
top.
captain's chairs in the second row, and I was a little disappointed that they don't fold completely flat. I don't know about the bench seat. That would be a killer for me.
Didn't seem like a ton of leg room back there either, honestly.
The engine's throttle, and I think Brian mentioned this first to me, the very temperamental throttle, very
it's super touchy. Yeah,
Yeah, I
they
tell
want
you.
you to feel
Wow.
it's like it's really powerful. So you just breathe on the throttle and it takes off. But then once you stay on the throttle, then it like slows way down and you got to get back on the throttle. It's kind of annoying. I mean, you get used to it if it's your car. But
It is, but I thought for a lot of people, they're going to find that a little too touchy. They'll probably think, oh, I got a huge amount of power,
Right.
but I thought it was a little touchy. Seats are hard, nice looking.
typical
Very
Subaru.
hard, typical
Yeah.
Subaru. I couldn't get a couple of the dash displays to work, but that's probably just my ignorance. So. But drives nice. Drives kind of steering's rather numb.
Like you said, I mean, if you didn't know you weren't in an Outback, you would just think you're in an
you'd
Outback.
think in a big Outback. That was actually my wife Cheryl's first reaction. She walked out and said, "Wow, this is like a big Outback." And I said, "Well, yeah."
Great visibility, like every Subaru.
Yeah.
You can see everywhere around you.
The evolution of their instrument panel, I think, has been a good one. The controls seem to be, there's more redundancy with the touchscreen. There's things seem to be a little bit better placed. There wasn't as much stuff hidden. I like that they've moved the parking brake down on the console, which is not brand new, but not every vehicle has had that. I don't know. I liked it. I thought it was going to, by with those few caveats, I think it's going to do really well.
Yeah,
Yeah, they'll sell a ton of them.
that was one of mine.
Okay, so Subaru Ascent. Our viewer question, this is from Charles, and we sort of talked about it at the beginning. It teased it. He says that he is unusual. He's in the minivan market. Actually, you're not. They still sell, about 500,000 a year. He's interested in the Toyota Sienna because it has the optional all-wheel drive system, but he's also looking at the Honda Odyssey and Chrysler Pacifica. Which one would you choose? And I bet we get at least 3 different answers here.
Wow. Well, I mean, they keep saying there's a new Sienna coming out, but I think after the Pacifica came out, and then they said there was one coming out, and then Odyssey came out, I think they keep going back to the drawing board. But eventually there'll be a new Sienna out. I would probably be interested in that. But as of right now, I would definitely get the Odyssey. And I wouldn't worry about not having all-wheel drive. Just get some decent winter tires, and you'll do just as well as that Sienna does with all-wheel drive.
Anybody else?
I liked our long-term Pacifica a little bit more than the Odyssey. The stow and go is a big thing, but
Also, the
I
the
just-
second row seats don't fold in our
Odyssey.
in the Odyssey, which kind of
Right.
drives me crazy.
And if you're a person who likes styling, the Pacifica is definitely the better looking of between the Odyssey and the Sienna. But I don't know if that's what you think about when you buy a minivan.
I think a lot of people think about quality, and I think in that aspect, the Odyssey probably has the edge.
Yes, definitely.
That's how I felt. I liked our Pacifica a lot at the beginning, but after a year, you could definitely see where some things weren't holding up as well. Whereas the Odyssey, everything's pretty much as it was
Same
when
as
we
day
got
one.
it. Yeah, I mean, it drives great. I would probably go Odyssey, but I will say, I'm not sure if Charles is into the plug-in hybrid, but I was really impressed with the Pacifica plug-in hybrid, as a lot of people
Except you lose the stow and go.
were, which is a big seller of the Pacifica.
I guess the stow and go is the reason I would buy the Pacifica.
Yeah.
And without that, it's like, well, okay, it's kind of back to the drawing board.
But I guess, it depends on what he's trying to do. I mean, if you're
Yeah, if you're just going to carry people,
yeah.
and don't really care about the easy flexibility because the Sienna doesn't have, the easy flexibility. of the
But if he
Pacifica.
does want the all-wheel drive, you mentioned earlier, John, the ground clearance on the Pacifica especially is pretty low.
It's very low.
So, depending on where you live, that could be a real downer.
Yeah.
Whereas I guess the all-wheel drive Sienna might be a little higher off the ground.
But I think it was Brian or somebody said before we went on the air that, if you're worried about traction, just get some decent tires.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could put some...
Well, I'm not saying all-wheel drive is not necessary in some cases, but it's overrated as far as what people think they need in the wintertime.
Or quote-unquote off-road on a dirt road.
Decent set of winter tires on front-wheel drive is usually just as good.
I've been taking the Odyssey we have here up some very steep grades that are often very muddy or covered with wet leaves. And sure, if you basically stop on a steep incline and try to go with too much throttle, you're going to spin. But if I had different tires on it, I could probably not have any problem. If I can make it up the hills that I put that vehicle through with a front-wheel drive and the factory tires, just anybody can. So
there you go.
All right. Well, Charles, I hope that probably doesn't answer your question completely. My final advice is go test each one of them, drive them around, get a good test drive, and make your determination.
Buy an Odyssey.
And you'll probably buy the Odyssey. Yeah. Rant and rave time. And anything making any of us angry or happy?
I've always got something, but again.
Well, go ahead.
So when you're coming to a stoplight and there's a straight lane, a left turn lane, and maybe sometimes a right turn lane, I'll ask this first. So how close is appropriate to get to the car in front of you when you're stopping? I mean,
You should leave a car length. Are you talking about when you come
to a complete stop at a stoplight?
I usually leave a car length.
A full car length?
Yeah. But everyone uses like 6 inches now.
I use I'll leave maybe 10 feet.
I leave way too much.
I leave a quarter of a car length.
And here's my argument against that is why would you leave so much space? And some people do go too close, but
some
when you
people,
have a
they
lane
basically...
like that, but when you're coming down, and you're coming from like a single lane that then goes into 3, then if you're leaving too much space, then people can't get into the left turn lane or the right turn lane.
Correct.
So you got to have like a situational awareness, which I'm sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't hog up a lane.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a lot of people who just don't understand.
But what are you seeing that people are
that
leaving?
People are way too far away from the car in front of them,
and so therefore you have no place
in that situation.
You have no place to stop. Except blocking the lane.
Exactly.
And so then what?
Just was curious.
Then when the left arrow turns green, you can't get over to the left-hand turn lane.
So
left-hand turn lane's empty, and you're sitting 50 yards back.
In that
can't
situation,
get to it.
I'm not saying ride the other person's bumper, but maybe scoot up a little bit to give a person a chance to get by, because ultimately you want to get traffic moving, and sometimes it's impossible if you're giving a car length or so. But that's just my piece.
I have a gripe that seems to be getting worse, and maybe it's just people on their phones, but I noticed so many people driving down the middle of the lanes.
Yes.
I mean, straddling 2 lanes is what I'm saying. Straddling the center lines when you've got 2 lanes in each direction, and taking turns that way, and it's like hogging the whole road. Now, do you think they're on their phones and it's just happening because they're not paying attention? But it seems to be getting worse.
People seem to treat center lines like a suggestion, it seems.
I think it's honestly a distraction. It's getting so bad, like really bad.
I agree.
So stressed out about which lane to get in when they get to the stop sign, I guess.
They're worried about making me mad.
Maybe it's time to rethink
podcast.
about driver's education in this country. Well, all right. I think that's going to pretty much wrap up our podcast number 191 for today. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Brian Robinson, Greg Carlos, Joe Ligo, of course. Joe's also been the producer of the podcast. Our audio engineer today is the one and only David Wainwright, and our podcast creator is Bob Mixter. We want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your day or evening to listen to our MotorWeek podcast and to watch MotorWeek on public TV stations around the country and also on the Velocity channel. Till next time, I'm John Davis for MotorWeek, and all of us here, thanks very much for being a part of MotorWeek.
You have been listening to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. MotorWeek is made possible by TireRack.com, WeatherTech, and by Rain-X. Hum by Verizon, and State Farm.